Welcome back to Sustainable Futures Career Conversations. I'm delighted to be joined by Donna Lyndsay from the Ordnance Survey to talk about her career and thoughts around what the future of sustainability looks like. So without further ado, Donna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm Donna Lyndsay. I am the Strategic Market Lead for Environment and Sustainability at Ordnance Survey. What that actually means is that I look at those future spaces that Ordnance Survey can actually really help with, thinking about our capability, particularly around location. How can we actually really support some of these key challenges going forward?
Love it. And we'll dig into that in a lot more detail later. But I wanted to start with your sort of early career. It's a fascinating one. So I won't steal your thunder. But if you talk about how you sort of came into the world of sustainability and your early interests, that would be lovely.
No, it's a very, very odd background, really, I guess. So I've always lived on Exmoor when I was born, actually, in the place that I live now. And so I've always had a real inherent affinity with nature, if you like. We live in a national park. We were very spoilt in that way. And actually, ironically, when I was at school, I was always probably better at geography than art, I would suggest. But I was always really interested in art as well, and that sort of creative thing. So back in the day, I'm quite old now. We used to have these forms that you used to have to fill in to say like what you were interested in and what your job will be type thing. And it came out with the term cartographer, and I'd never heard of that at all. And I kind of just parked it, and I pursued an arts path. I went to study graphics in London, and decided actually I didn't think I was good enough to really have a good career in it. So I actually did a really bad thing and quit my course. So I came home and I just started doing some local jobs. And luckily, a job came up in the local drawing office, that they were called in those days, at the National Park, doing cartography. And that's how I started, and I ended up sort of like, doing all the cartographic work, which is why I've got so many scars on my hands. In those days, you used to have to use scalpels and reprographics and sapphire tips and things like that. And it was on the cusp of when things like geographical information systems were coming into more mainstream use. So I became really interested in that. Plus, also, I didn't really want to live in chainmail for the rest of my life. So I started doing all the digitization work for the mapping for the national park, also using traditional surveying techniques too with the ecologists and all that. And then one day I found a load of research shoved down the back of a filing cabinet. And I hadn't realised that one of our previous national park officers was a chap called Dr. Len Curtis, who was very famous within the remote sensing world. He was one of the really early groundbreaking people who were exploring the use of satellite data within sort of like environmental science. So I found all his research, got really interested in it, and I decided to go and study it. And that's where I sort of carried on from that moment on.
Fantastic. And you've sort of gone down a slightly technical and then a more commercialisation of those as the sort of careers developed. Just talk me through how that sort of evolved from a very technical into a much more commercially minded role.
Absolutely, yeah, because obviously, I went through all the pain of doing all the technical work, but then I realised really quite early on that actually things were sort of stuck. So you have a lot of the Earth observation, fantastic science that had been going on for decades, basically, that wasn't getting out into the mainstream, and that people weren't using it, and people didn't really know how to articulate the reason why they should be using this data for solving some of these key challenges. So I moved into an Earth observation / remote sensing software company to help them sort of, generate the interest, particularly within the environmental side. And then I just carried on progressing through that route through various different companies, really helping do that connection between the end users and the products and services that they need to use. Yes. And it's interesting that there's a real language problem between these really high-end sciences, and it's quite complicated. People think they've got to have a PhD to understand it, et cetera, but actually the end user, they need to use all that, but they don't need to do it. They just need the answer to the question they have, and it's really doing that entire end-to-end translation that is the bit that's been missing. Yes. So I support now a lot of the UK Space Agency projects, for example, helping them to do that translation piece between the UK scientists, etc. But it's a really interesting problem space.
And it's sort of not just the maps, is it? It's sort of the wider... So just talk about what that field looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I came into Ordnance Survey on the back of, probably about 20 odd years or so of doing a lot of commercial work and creating products and services to support a lot of environmental challenges. And the reason why I came into Ordnance Survey, because I've been on the outside of it for a long time, all of my career been using Ordnance Survey data for various things. And I really wanted to see how I could connect up the worlds of space and geospatial. Because to me, everything's located on the planet. If we don't know where things are, it's really hard for the Earth observation component to work, because you end up looking at something but thinking like, oh, there's a thing going on here. Don't quite know what that thing is. I don't know who owns it, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that was an obvious bridging device to enable those insights to flow. So when I came into Ordnance Survey, it's really about exploring, how do we do that blend of geospatial and Earth observation data, or data from space, to really help, our customers, like the public sector. We've got 5,000 of those. The private sector, who also utilise our data services, etc., and really helping them understand what is the art of the possible with all this stuff. But it all comes down to location. If we don't know that well enough,
yes,
we can't do it.
No.
And that's what's been driving a lot of these projects that I'm working on.
So give me some examples, because there are some fascinating ones, aren't there? Just give me some of the things that you've sort of enjoyed working on most recently. Yeah,
it's really interesting. So one of the ones that I started very early on was actually based on one of my dissertations, actually, which was a long time ago. But essentially, it was about how do you monitor effectively. So we knew there was a massive challenge around creating high integrity carbon credits. The carbon credit market's just bottomed out, basically, because of all the issues. And so we've been working with Natural England to see how can we actually create a far more robust way of demonstrating to investors that their investments are going in the right direction, that they're getting the carbon credits that they deserve. So it's a combination of Ordnance Survey surveying skill sets, ecologists, plus also utilising Earth observation and remote sensing capabilities to create that high integrity information that then can be monitored for the duration, because these things need to be monitored for about 30 years. So you need an entity like Ordnance Survey really that's got that longevity, yes, and duration to make sure you can actually keep that investment going in the right direction. A lot of the problems with this particular space is it's primarily dominated by startups, and a lot of startups don't, unfortunately, exist beyond a couple of years. So it's quite challenging for them to commit then, yes, to that long-term monitoring. I mean, some of them need to be monitored for 80 to 100 years.
Yes.
It's really tough. Yeah.
So presumably a lot of your work is around partnerships and working, collaborating with other organisations. And as you say, there's sort of a little bit of a coming and going and different types of organisations. Talk to me about how that sort of partnership arrangement sort of adds value to what you're doing.
Yeah. We couldn't do it without partnerships. And it's actually a really, really important skill set to be able to collaborate with people effectively and honestly. So one of the partnerships, which seems to have just grown arms and legs and all sorts of stuff all over the place, is something that came from a problem space that I was investigating with Unilever. And they basically have a problem of knowing where things are on the planet. And as a geographer, like, it's just X, Y, and Z, isn't it?
Yes.
put a pin in a map. But actually, that is technically what we're trying to do, actually. But on a global scale, it's actually quite hard to do with confidence. So we tested the problem statement around the world with various government departments from different countries and things like that, and other private sectors. And actually, we realised it was a real thing, this problem space of knowing where. So we span up a global partnership with people like Esri, Deloitte, Unilever, Trace, who are part of the Stockholm Environment Institute, Glyph, who are the Global Legal Entity Identification Foundation. I know that they've got a fantastic mission statement. Okay. And a company called GS1, who basically do all the barcode standards for the world, etc. And it's all about how do we deliver transparency around asset location, but have it verified, independently verified, which means it suddenly can unlock a whole host of other capabilities around metrics, around understanding where your risks and vulnerabilities are in your supply chain, around green financing and all that sort of stuff like that. It seems to have been the missing link, and I think it's because people have assumed it's always existed. Yes. And conceptually it's quite simple, but actually it's not been done. So we call it the golden pin. Right. The intention is it's to be market led. That companies like Unilever will say to their suppliers, I will only use you if you are on this system. because they need them to be transparent.
Okay. And so when you talk about assets, what sort of things are you talking about?
So these are things like processing plants, distribution units, storage facilities, silos.
So
physical assets, because you've got to be able to see it.
Yes.
Because this is only scalable if we can utilise Earth observation capabilities.
Yes.
So we're also working with, beginning to work with IBM, because they have a fantastic global foundational data model that we can then start utilising machine learning and AI capabilities on top of to do these discrete pull-outs of assets.
Yes.
We need to try and automate it as much as possible because on a global scale, obviously, that's a big demand. Yes. Somebody quoted billions of assets the other day, which is mildly terrifying.
Yes. Yes.
So it's been a really interesting one to take forward, but that's now part of a bigger coalition of coalitions, if you like, called the Constellation. And the Constellation's ambition is to basically convert markets from being harmful to being protective, which is a nice mission to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if only if we've got another meeting today, but that's 100 global corporations coming together and trying to make this transition.
And you've mentioned AI there, and it's the sort of buzzword at the moment.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
But I suspect for you, it's a real life query about, okay, how is this going to impact what we do and how we do it? Just talk to me about the sort of AI conundrum and what value it has in your world.
I think AI is really interesting. It's I think it has real ability to help us be much more productive. So the type of system I'm talking about for the asset registration, it can only work if we can use these capabilities. If we had to put people on it, it would take millions of years essentially. Whereas if we can use AI capabilities, we can actually get them, on a very quick basis. And I think, if we utilise AI appropriately, we can actually, do things, that we've not really had the capability time-wise to do it before. It's not like we can't do it. It just takes too many individuals. I think people get really worried about AI taking over jobs and roles and things like that. But, I think we've got a bit too hung up on it about it doing creativity things. Yes. And actually it starts, I think what will happen is that when these things come through, we realise it deadens content. So my husband's an artist, for example, so he's really worried about this can do this really, the sci-fi stuff is really great, But you get to, you forget how important that human creativity bit is. So I think even though we can still use AI and stuff like that, we're still going to need
it's a certain
human
task,
mind.
isn't it? I was thinking of this situation, a story, one of the early jobs that I recruited back 25 odd years ago was a crocodile counter in the marshes in Pakistan, who would literally fly over the marshes in Pakistan and count crocodiles. And that's just so much. You can do that with a few clicks of a button.
I was going to say we can do that now.
And I think that's interesting that you've got sort of an evolution of roles and jobs that are coming through. And I think, as you say, it's getting that balance right, isn't it, between using it in the right way, but not to replace what human ingenuity can do.
But that's interesting because your crocodile counter will still be important because you still need to verify the models. Exactly.
Yes.
And so there are still these key skill sets. So one of the other projects that we're working on at the moment is to see, can we upskill our surveyors are very good at doing topographic things like buildings and hedge lines and stuff like that. But can we co-train them to collect habitat data, for example?
Yes.
We've got 230 odd in the field every day. Can they just add another 10 minutes on collecting certain features? So we're working with people like the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology to see if we can co-train. Okay. And again, that then still means we still have a requirement for people on the ground, to actually help with these models. So because obviously government is really pushing for, the upskilling around machine learning and AI capabilities to pull this data out. Yes. We still need that good data in to train it. And
that sort of brings me on to the other part of the conversation, which is around skills and skill sets, and particularly for you as an individual and the skills that you feel have got your career to where it is now. But the second part of that's going to be around, okay, what's the skill sets coming? What are people going to need to do? So if we look at you for a minute, what skills have you developed in your career that you think have been particularly useful?
Yeah, I think I've often wondered about this, and I do wonder if it's because I've come from the arts and the sciences. I haven't had one pathway. And I think that makes me different. So I come across a lot of people who come through one pathway and they think in a certain way.
Yes.
Whereas I mean, might be just me, but I do tend to think in a different way. And I'm also an observer. And I think arts gives you that training to observe things in a different way.
Yes.
So, some people are really good listeners, aren't they? But if you listen and look,
yes,
you can actually detect a lot more.
Yes.
And I think that's given me a slightly different way of seeing the world.
Yes.
To most of my colleagues who look at it from a data point of view or from a very technical perspective. So having that sort of weird blend of understanding the science well enough. I'm not as good as my colleagues, but I know it well enough to know what's doable, etc. Plus also understanding, how do you interpret the world in a visual language is a different way of bringing those two things together.
Yeah,
and
I'm not sure I've thought of that before.
No,
I think
it's just a really weird, and that's why I kind of connected on that cartographic element, because you're interpreting the world in a much more simpler fashion than obviously in existence, but actually you need to do it in a way that is translatable but beautiful.
Yes.
Because then people can engage with it.
Beauty is important, isn't it?
Beauty is really important, yeah.
And sometimes you forget that in the midst of numbers and practicalities.
Absolutely. And of course, the other thing that you've always got to have in the back of your head is that when you're talking to people about this data stuff, first thing they're going to want to do is see their house. Yes. Because they want to put it into their own context.
Yes.
So that they can understand it then. They can understand what you're talking about. And,
and
we forget all that actually... just giving numbers to people means nothing.
Yes. And in your career, have you had a plan? Have you had a plan that you followed, or is it?
I would love to say I had a plan. Always amazes me when people say they have a plan. Life changes.
Yes.
And I think to me, I learned quite late on that actually the only person that was getting in my way was me. And that's always something that I've tried to impart to grads and things like that who start at work, is that actually, you might like, because I'm technically an introvert, and for most of my life I've been really shy and things like that. But I've made put myself into positions where, I talk to people, I do a lot of presentations now, so it becomes quite naturally. But you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to take those opportunities, because you'll never change otherwise.
Yeah.
And I realised probably in my late 30s, after I've got 2 children. And they were still quite young at this stage. And I was given the opportunity for a discussion with Richard Branson. Okay. And I read we'd been on holiday, I read the email way too late, so it was the same day.
Right.
I live on Exmoor. It's quite a challenge, but it wouldn't have been insurmountable to do it. And I put all these barriers in my way, and then it was too late to be able to do anything about it. And I suddenly realised, actually, I was the only one who stopped myself from doing that. And ever since that moment, I've looked at all the opportunities and said, I'm just going to do it. To say yes and see what happens.
Really good advice, anyway.
Yeah.
I'll come back to the sort of wider skill set in a minute, but just to contextualise that, I'm going to take it back to the world that you live in at the moment and what's around the corner, and what sort of potential developments there are in the world of geosensing and sort of, more broadly that utilisation of geographic information to guide and help us make more sustainable decisions. Are there sort of trends that you're seeing that how that's going to be used?
Huge. So I mentioned the constellation earlier. That incorporates all of the financial services side of things, big corporations, etc. And what we're finding is that that the thing that was a real jaw-dropping moment for me as a geographer is that the financial services system is totally unconnected to the real world. I mean, just totally. So we're now trying to bring those worlds into alignment, and you will see, I think, within the next sort of 5 years, hopefully quicker than that, a massive realignment of portfolios against real world challenges. And that's when we'll see the transition, because you can start then attaching it to actually what is actually happening, where your investments are actually making that change and impact. And it means that things will be far more transparent. So people, when they look at their portfolios, they won't be able to just look at ISIN numbers and things like that. They'll be able to say, actually, I can associate that. I know that is doing the right thing.
And that's what it looks like. And this is, again, it's a visual thing, isn't it? It's not just having a number or a name on a bit of paper. It's as a number. I think you're absolutely right. And I think often the dealings with those finance, it's fantastic that the finance world has started to understand the world of ESG is important to them. but it's the next evolution of that. It's important beyond the set of numbers, and I think that's just, we're still at a relatively early stage of that, and the sort of work that you're doing is really important in that.
Yeah, it's leading edge. So we're working with a community interest company called Rewired Earth. And that is all about rewiring the system. So they're using the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework because it's a common understood language by citizens as well as governments, etc. And corporations use it all the time. But actually what they're trying to do is to try and make a system that's citizen sentiment in terms of what's important to them can then be harnessed by corporations to make sure they're doing the right things and that aligns with that customer sentiment, plus also to make it transparent in terms of the metrics to show actually the companies are doing the right thing. And then that'll affect shareholder value, then it'll affect director pay, and that's where you'll get the change.
And it's the E and the S and the G and the social bit, and bringing people with that journey is so important. And that's we're sort of coming to a bit of a conclusion, and it's that chance to talk about, okay, what skills do you think people need to develop? And I did read a quote from you when I was preparing for this, that everybody needs to be a geographer, which I really like. My daughter's speaking about a degree at the moment, and geography is one of the options, and I'm going to use that when I speak to her.
Absolutely. I think we do, it is so important. I mean, we all use it every day without even realising it. So we use position, navigation and timing on our phones, and we use it to navigate ourselves around. Everything happens on the planet. And actually, we need to have an awareness around our activities on that as well. So, I think geography, to me, really should be at the forefront of a lot of these things around delivering sustainability, around, making sure we can do that transition. And it touches everything, So this is why, I'm really keen to break down those silos that we have and actually attach it to the planet, because that's where we make that change.
That you talked about, it's
exactly.
Breaking down those silos is so important.
Yeah. And so from a skill sets point of view, you need to be perpetually curious. Never think you're done.
Yes.
And never think you know enough.
Yes.
Because it's there's always going to be someone who knows more than you. Yep. So, work with them, don't try and replicate, etc. And that's what we've been trying to do around things like the constellation, that finding those entities that have that specific skill. Yes. So we're not reinventing anything. We're pulling it along. We're working together and just bridging those gaps. Yes. So perpetually curious, and make sure that you put yourself out of your comfort zone. Because if you don't, you'll never grow and learn and all that sort of stuff. And always learn, always read everything, read newspapers, read books, all that sort of stuff like that. Don't just get fed it, because you'll end up going down a bucket hole, basically.
20-second clips are an entry point into something wider, and I think there's a significant value in that, but it needs to be things, and that's an interesting skill to develop, is that finding out how to find out more. And it's something you don't naturally do necessarily. So yes, really interesting, fabulous. No, that's been brilliant. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I have. Some really interesting things that have come out of that, and certainly a fascinating time to come in the world that you inhabit as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.